This has your name.
Do you want to start?
No.
All right. So we're on to the third of the four immeasurables, which is sympathetic joy, or Alan Wallace actually translates it as empathetic joy. I feel like you should be saying the next thing because I wrote it down when you said it.
Okay. Well, are you going to finish the empathetic joy and sympathetic joy and give an overview? Or do you want... The flows failed us here. Well, what I wrote down was, when we were talking about this with loving kindness and compassion, we use other beings to like help us along with that. We visualize another being to whom we have a strong positive or negative connection, and we can kind of trick ourselves in that when we're doing that into thinking that they are the beneficiary of the practice, when in fact what we're trying to do is cultivate loving kindness and compassion in our own mind stream. With empathetic joy, it's pretty obvious that right off the bat we're kind of the main beneficiaries because we're trying to have joy in other people's beings, and so that's really it kind of starts and ends with us. So that's what I said. I wanted to go from there.
Sure, and Alan Wallace talks a lot about how when you're cultivating empathetic joy, what you really want to do is you're thinking of somebody who doesn't need anything from you. You want to think of somebody who is experiencing joy in their life, or he actually suggests starting with somebody who you just feel like has a really joyful affect, and he mentions the Dalai Lama as a great example of that. And the practice is simply to rejoice in their joy. You don't need to give them anything. You don't need to take anything away from them. You're simply resting in a sense of being joyful in their joy, and we can think of that in just the ordinary way of. But an example that's often given is the way a parent feels when their child has a success. That you just automatically feel this sort of upwelling of happiness because they're happy, and there's no agenda there, and there's not even any territory there. It really arises out of this incredibly positive connection that you have with them. But there's also another aspect of it, which is this idea of rejoicing in virtue, and that is taking joy in all of the things that are planting the seeds of good results. So whether it's in ourselves or in others. So rejoicing in our positive aspirations, in our meditation practice, in our good conduct in the world, in the good actions that we see other people doing in the world, in the practice of others. It's really this quality of looking at and thinking, yes, I do have confidence in the Dharma. I believe that it is a positive and worthwhile thing. Maybe I even believe it's the most worthwhile thing you could be doing with your time. And I see other people engaging in it. I see myself engaging in it. And I'm simply going to rest in the sense of joy because all of that is happening. And if we're going to sustain our practice over the long term, at some point we have to find joy in our path. And you know, someone said that to me a couple of years ago, and for a long time I thought about it in very conventional terms, like, oh, what they're telling me is I have to start getting excited about the process and not the product. Like I have to engage with the, you know, the whole thing, even when it doesn't feel like it's bearing fruit. But I actually think that what they were trying to point at was this deeper thing. At some point, we just have to be willing to say, "This is good," and it's okay to feel joyful about that. Like this is valuable for myself and for others, and it's worth paying attention to, and just really allowing ourselves to feel like this is beneficial, this is good for me, this is good for others, this is good for the world, and I'm happy about it. We can just be happy about the fact that that we found a path and that we're engaging that path. I found a quote this week that I really liked, and I wanted to share. It says, "To practice joyfulness is to be constantly observant of everything that is good and nice and correct and accomplished in others. Then associate your happiness not with your own accomplishment, but with theirs, particularly those accomplishments that have nothing to do with you." You know, so it's not about us and what we can accomplish and what we can do for others or what we're achieving, but it's kind of cultivating this this mindset of always noticing the positive, always noticing what's good, noticing what's healthy.
Who's that quote?
The quote is from Jetsun Khandro Rinpoche, who is a female teacher who was born in India, and she's trained in both the Kagyu and the Nyingma traditions.
That's good.
And she has a nice piece online, which I'd be happy to share, which is all about the four immeasurables. So when we talked about the other immeasurables, we talked about the near enemy and the far enemy. So the near enemy of joy, in the way that Alan Wallace puts it, is frivolity, which he describes as, you know, it's not a negative thing, but it's a sort of surface dwelling sense of, oh, that's nice, that's good, everything's happy. And it's not negative, but it's sort of missing the opportunity to tap in deeper to a real sense of rejoicing. And this is another quote from Jetsun Khandro Rinpoche. "The characteristic that opposes the generation of joy is described in an interesting Tibetan phrase. Loosely translated, it is a state of mind that dwells in its own unhappiness to such a degree that it cannot be sympathetic toward others. You develop a cynical and critical outlook on everything, including yourself and others." Which is something I certainly related to, and I'm guessing a lot of other people can relate to.
And these times.
What's that?
There's a lot of that during this political time. I think it's really hard not to fall into that.
Yeah. Yeah. So the kind of the opposite to the cultivation of joy is falling into this habit of thought, which is constantly critical, and what's especially relevant when it applies to our practice. It's very easy, I think, sometimes to fall into a space of thinking, oh, my practice should have been like this, or this worked and that didn't, and that was okay, but I've read it should be better, and you constantly you just find yourself looking for what's not right instead of looking for what's right and rejoicing in that. So this is practicing this immeasurable is really all about getting in the habit of looking for the positive. I'm not sure what else I wanted to say there.
We hadn't talked about this, but it occurs to me.
Okay.
The great thing about the four measurables is that they help us work with other beings who are always a part of our life. We're social, so we're always interacting with other beings. And sympathetic joy is, I think there's a kind of a conventional truth that we know as human beings, which is it's really difficult to hate someone once you know more about them. The more you know about somebody, the more difficult it is to hate them. And so when we're talking about our polarized political time, I think a lot of people just wish that we spent more time together and interacted more, because if we went out to lunch with somebody, we'd probably have a different relationship than if we interacted through the political system, whatever it is. Sympathetic joy is one of these ways for us to tend our wholesome relationships with other people, where we're looking for the virtue and the joy that they have, which when we have, if you have a person who has, if you know a person who has some objectionable qualities, superficial qualities, maybe they don't, they're impolite, or they have bad political views, or whatever it is. But they're your father, or them really well. Then you can have all this sympathetic joy for them, because it's like, it's not really, I have this, the connection you have to that person, and it's a toehold into falling down into a deeper place, and it helps us nurture those connections we have and understand people at a kind of deeper level, I think. We are all connected, and the Buddhists talk about tendril and how we're all connected together in this web, and we talk about the other teaching of everybody was our mother in the past. This is a way of applying that teaching and looking for those things that we could take joy in together.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a way to kind of soften things, and these practices are really designed to soften. It would be great if we practiced sympathetic joy and other people's behaviors changed. But it's possible that won't happen. And so really what the practice is for us to find genuine sympathetic joy, to be able to find genuine sympathetic joy with other people that we might meet, whether we see them as superficially objectionable, or even if they have even more confoundingly, sometimes people do things like commit murders or do these other things, and these immeasurables, it's immeasurable sympathetic joy. So that means no one's exempted. You want to find the capacity within your heart to have that sympathetic joy with everybody, which can be really difficult. So practice is kind of the hard, that's the way we get there, is through the practice of sympathetic joy.
I was just going to ask you guys, in terms of like these far enemies, it's occurring to me. I remember, I think it was the Dalai Lama. I remember there's a teaching that's like taking pleasure in someone else's suffering is just about kind of the worst thing a Buddhist could do. I'm not recording that very well. That's pretty close, and in Western terms anyway. And I noticed that my schadenfreude of taking pleasure in some other folks' suffering is pretty much like automatic sometimes. Like I do, sometimes what you just said is right, like as you get to know somebody, you think, oh yeah, get to know my cousin so-and-so, and they're pretty racist and stuff, that's pretty bad. But the more I know them, they're, pretty nice too, and they're my cousin, so I kind of, but some people, there's an exception. Some people, I get to know them, the more I get to know them, I do not like them. And then there's definitely kind of like the enemy folk that I don't, there's the Donald Trump, the gang enemies that I just, when I hear like maybe Ivanka and Steve Bannon aren't getting along, like my first thing is like, good. Like the Schadenfreude, and I have to actually then it's like impulsive or reactive, and I have to then actually make an effort and catch myself and think, oh gosh, bad Buddhist, don't be enjoying Schadenfreude, practice Tonglen for those folks, and I have to actually work at it.
Right.
But I know that it's coming up. I know that it's, and sometimes people I do know, like my sister's boyfriend, who I dislike terribly, something bad happens to him, and the same thing happens. Yeah, that's great. And then I have to turn myself and actually intentionally try to do these things, like practice the four immeasurables, and remember, try to practice compassionately regarding that and stuff. And I just wondered if you guys have any experience in kind of addressing that, almost like a kind of automatic Schadenfreude for folks that are just, people that, we don't necessarily like very well, or are kind of constantly contending with negatively.
There's a related thing to what you're talking about in this practice, which is sometimes we'll have a connection with somebody, and they'll do something that we do actually have a flickering moment of, that was pretty good, or that was funny, like an initial little positive reaction, and our negative connection is so strong that we cut it off and look for the negative. Donald Trump, not that everybody, but to use your example, not saying where I stand on the Donald Trump issue. It's some kind of a fault to feel any positivity toward him, and that's a related thing. We go through the active wishing, the active joy of the foibles, and the cutting off of anything positive. I think.
Wait.
Let me just.
Okay.
Well, I was going to talk about path and fruit. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say exactly what you described, Joe, is exactly right. With the one exception that you said, and then I think bad Buddhist. But in that moment, it's good Buddhist. You saw it, and you thought, this is not who I want to be. This is not the instinctive reaction I want to have. I'm going to cultivate something else. The only way to eventually undermine the automatic Schadenfreude is to intentionally put something in its place, and cultivate over time a different impulse, so that maybe someday the first reaction will be a different reaction, but what you're doing is absolutely perfect.
Thanks. Yeah, those far enemies are pretty serious, actually. They have to be disregarded.
Yeah.
They can grab me quick, and then all of a sudden, four immeasurables are sort of,
I heard somebody describe how enlightened bodhisattvas relate to other people, and it really struck a chord with me. Wherever I've read or heard this or whatever, if you're an enlightened bodhisattva, you relate to, when you see other people, you relate to their Buddha nature, right? That's what you're relating to. You don't relate to their faults. You see their Buddha nature, and you can relate to that. That's the enlightened state. That's what happens once you're there, right? That's the fruit. And a lot of times we confuse the fruit and the path. The path is when we're failing. The path is if you were succeeding, you don't need to apply the path. So what Sally said is exactly right. I think that if you have if you see that and you can do Tonglen, you're already enjoying. You're applying the path, but enjoying some fruit, because you didn't just feed that fire. So often, what we want to do is we have the Schadenfreude and we just dump gasoline on the fire, and then maybe 10 minutes later we're like, oh, but by then the gasoline's already on the fire. It's already burned itself out. So you miss that chance, and maybe you don't notice it at all. Maybe you go years and you never notice any of that stuff. So to the extent, this is one of those things about taking joy. I think we're going to talk about joy a little bit more in our next class, which is another critical thing. Joy and humor in the practice is really important because taking joy in those successes of seeing that is so important. Noting that you had the capacity to see that arise, that is real fruit. And I bet there's nobody in this room who can say that they apply the antidote every time something like that arises. It's something they're all working.
And often it does feel like hard work. Like the joy isn't occurring to me. I'm like, okay, I need to try to practice, sending compassion to so and so, and it's like I really have to like work at it. It's like
And that's what this practice does, and we do it gently on people we care about, so then that basically the entire path is mind training, and we're always trying to train our mind. If we're training our mind, if we're not training our mind to do one thing, it's training itself to do something else. Some kind of mind training is happening, and every time we dump gasoline on a fire, we're training ourselves to get more trigger happy and to feed the anger. So even interrupting that process is valuable, even if it doesn't feel very good.
And it is hard work, and it's why when you read anything about the four immeasurables, they always say, start with yourself, and then move to somebody with whom you have an entirely positive relationship, then maybe move to somebody neutral, and then start working with people who you really have negative relationship with, because it's so difficult to carry these principles and these attitudes when you're confronting someone with whom you have really deep reactivity and automatic reactivity. And it can be, it's so easy to get carried away when something feels really hot. Like what we want to do is feed it.
And I'm also aware, I'm totally relating to this, unfortunately, but that I could be the one pouring on more gasoline, or my partner can, and so how, and he's not a Buddhist practitioner, so it's kind of like, sort of cutting, I mean, it's sort of like, it's an aspect of wanting to cut that off, but then I'm not listening, I'm not being empathic toward him or what he's feeling or whatever, but I don't need that on top of my stuff. So, we talk about it, but I mean, that's obviously an important step. But I also have, been, I haven't been the one sort of stopping it, I just sort of say, oh yeah, I agree, and more fire, like more fuel, and then everybody's agitated. How great is that, isn't that? So anyway.
We had to make a signal in our house. Too much. Okay. And I was like, we had to talk about it and agree about that, because they're the same things.
Okay, yeah, I bet, yeah.
Too much.
Yeah,
And
okay.
shortcut to wisdom that I've learned from another teacher is that we have control over our second thought and our first action. So the first thought comes up, we often and arguably never have control over that, but you can notice it, and you have choice over it to pour the gasoline or not at that point. The first thought though, it's just that's life. As far as what I gathered.
Yeah, it's very good. That's very
That's
useful.
nice.
Yeah, in dialectical behavioral therapy, we actually say it's the feeling. First thing is the feeling, the emotional thought comes up, and then we have control. Like, okay, wait a second, what do I rationally think, and then what do I do? Yeah, you're right.
Yep.
Very good.
And every time you see it and you make a choice, rejoice. Rejoice. We need to just celebrate again. Like we are doing the thing, we are making progress, we deserve to we deserve the best the path has to offer us. We're making genuine effort. Rejoice.
On your point, Ryan, but in the Buddhist kind of frame, the first thing is karma ripening. So you can have a white hot fiery emotion, whatever it is, and then this is the moment where if our mindfulness is in place, we cannot feed it, which is turning the wheel of karma again. So we can turn the wheel in different ways. This was one of the most revelatory instructions I ever heard from Michael. It was very early on. Zopa and I were talking earlier about a thing that used to happen here where we would study, have a book study group. And I remember one was hijacked by an upcoming election. So again, people were very hot about elections. And there was some kind of ballot measure. I don't even remember what it was. But it was the kind that was producing a lot of white hot emotion in the room. But it wasn't actually super clear from a Buddhist perspective, so the question came up, how should we vote? And Michael stopped to give this amazing teaching about the freedom that we have in this lifetime is in that bare space between the reactive emotion that arises and what we do with it. And so the whole practice is all these things help us take that little space and make it bigger and bigger and bigger, and not feed the karmic cycle. It was one of those things that it's when I started putting, Dope and I were talking about how I'd been engaging the Dharma through the books. It's like, all right, I'm done with books. I got to start meditating. It's like, this seems like some powerful stuff. And the other things like the four immeasurables are tools that help us recognize those things when they come. So contemplations, the aspirations that we do with the four immeasurables. These things give us that little bring our mind to those spaces when they open up. I hear. I should say. I was last night, just to confess something, I had trouble downloading a program from the internet, and at one point I was hollering at the computer. And,
has anyone ever done that?
I'm not a big holler. I don't usually get super angry. And I was doing this for long enough that Sally came and she's like, can I help? And I'm like, no, there's nothing to do. I'm just screaming at the computer. And then a half an hour later, I saw Sally and she's like, she was still all like very...
It was a little scary when it happened.
It was,
yeah.
and it was like, I totally lost my cool. This stuff happens. Last night for some minutes, I was pouring a lot of gasoline.
Bad Buddhist.
And it's nice to just, take joy in that. We see that stuff happen, and it's pretty funny. It's all right.
And Sally kept cool, calm, and collected while you. I mean, that's impressive.
Yeah, no, she did.
Yeah, it's cool. So that's modeling, not adding fuel. Oh my God, that computer's bad. What kind of problem is it?
Yeah.
She's just with you. Yeah.
We are interconnected, though, and my, my activities had an effect on Sally, so our karma was pinging off each other. So, that stuff happens. Yeah, we're not getting to it. Oh.
So I know that we don't have time to go into it deeply, but I feel like we should introduce this and we can maybe go deeper into it next week, because I think it's a valuable thing to share.
Well, can't we do it next week?
No,
I really want to do it.
Because we keep saying.
I know, but I really want to do it next week. Sally and I have this cool thing that I really wanted to do more on. And,
you just need to jump in and we'll get as far as we got. We started a few minutes late.
But we've given them so much information today.
Oh, that's true.
This is so cool.
We over-prepare for every session.
You guys want one more thing, or are you
Yeah,
sure.
sure.
All right. Let the people decide. So there is a cool aspiration prayer that is from Kal Rinpoche, who is this fellow here. He founded this center, and he was the person who inspired Michael to take up the Dharma, and many, many other people, actually. And he was the person who inspired Michael to go, and asked Michael to go on a 3-year retreat, and was the reason Michael did that. So in a very real way, a lot of us doing the Dharma here are doing it because of this person we maybe never even heard of. And he wrote this super cool aspiration prayer called The 8 Aspirations of a Great Being. I don't know when.
It's very young, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Gonna pass these around.
Yeah. And this is in service of that kind of big view. We've been talking about holding the big view, and how that can transform your mind and keep you from collapsing into that very small state. He wrote down these 8 stanzas that they're aspirations.
I'll have to share, or make some more copies.
Is there not more there?
I guess, no, there are other aspirations in here. Are there still? Okay.
We printed some out and forgot to bring them. Perhaps.
But we'll bring them and replenish the folder.
Yeah.
Did everybody get one?
Do you have one?
Yeah, we can
You
just
have.
make one more.
Yeah, because you and I can put this.
Yeah.
Okay, we have one more. So you can take this home and just work with it. Say it if you wish. Read it through if you wish. Maybe we can read it one time before we conclude here together. It's sort of, if you broke down the sort of Joe, you brought up something earlier that made me think of the Bodhisattva's vow, which is that you will work to empty the world of suffering beings until all beings are enlightened. And one of the things about being a Bodhisattva is you never leave a single being behind. And that sounds simple. It's like, oh, of course, you're Bodhisattva. But it's the most difficult thing when you start to think about it, because every time we think of that person who makes us angry, we're leaving them behind. Every time we think of a terrorist or somebody like, there's all these categories of people that we have that we leave behind. What's that?
We throw them out.
Yeah, we throw them out. So this aspiration prayer is kind of a way. I don't know why Colin Rinpoche wrote it. I'm not sure what his idea was behind it. But if you read it very often, it's like the biggest, most impossible activity you could possibly do.
Check out mine.
Especially if you take it literally. I love the 3rd stanza. May my body, flesh, and blood, everything I am made of, contribute in the most appropriate way to the welfare of all sentient beings. So imagine a wasp stinging you, or a mosquito biting you. Colin Rinpoche, he would take joy in that, like he's feeding a mosquito. You can imagine the idea of just giving everything down to your, to your death, all of your physical form. It's really a big kind of aspiration, and not one that you can take literally. Like, it is an aspiration. You can't say, I'll do this today, because it's just too big. But there's a real value in saying the words and thinking about them, and thinking about how you'd like to do them. Knowing that the bar isn't here, it's like so high up you can't even see it. And at least saying these things reminds you how high up it can go. So it's a really valuable, it's been in my practice especially, I don't know how often you say it, but it's really, really valuable. It's one of the few things that I kind of know the words to, and I'm terrible at memorization. But it's beautifully written, and it's quite nice. And if you find value in that big view and knowing where the big view is, and I think in many ways it does actually describe the state of enlightenment, because To hold all of this is to go to that place where you're leaving no part of your motivation is for yourself. So it sort of describes in an emotional and meaningful way, what it would be like if you were able to hold that view. Anyway, that's how I relate to it. So, should we say it through together, and then we can conclude the class?
Yeah.
By the power of the truth and goodness of the supreme refuges, and by the virtuous actions and the pure motivation, may I with all my heart exert myself in removing the myriad sufferings of being still in space. By the excellence of virtuous activities of this world and beyond, may I, according to the needs of each, satisfy the hopes and aspirations of all beings. May my body, flesh, and blood, everything I am made of, contribute in the most appropriate way to the welfare of all sentient beings. May the suffering of all beings, my previous mothers, dissolve in me, and may they have my joys and virtues. However long this world lasts, may I never have, even for a single instant, a malevolent thought towards another. May I always strive with energy for the welfare of beings, without relaxing my efforts in times of sadness, exhaustion, or other obstacles. For those who are hungry or thirsty, for the poor and needy, may I naturally lavish on them the abundance they wish for. May I bear the heavy load of the terrible suffering of beings of the hells and other realms, and may they all be free.
So this week, take a look at what feeds your practice, what makes it feel vital and alive, what makes you feel inspired. And if your practice is feeling dry or if you're feeling resistant, then if you don't normally use study or contemplation as part of your practice regimen, maybe experiment with those and see if they're helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did everybody? We have one more of these. Did everybody get one?
Thank you.